United Nations Security Council discussed latest developments on Yemen today. Houthi-laid mine explodes and kills 2 demining workers in Sada. Rights report documents Houthi human rights violations in Hajjah. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news and me, Shazad Delbey. The United Nations Security Council just held a meeting to discuss the latest developments in Yemen. In the meeting, the 3 briefers intervened: Hans Grunberg, the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, David Gressly, the UN Humanitarian Coordinator resident in Yemen, and Joyce Miswa, Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs. In his briefing before the Security Council members, Hans Grunberg affirmed that despite the expiry of the truce, it reduced civilian casualties, especially among children.
Despite the expiry of the truce, Yemen and its people continue to feel the benefits from the longest period of relative calm since the beginning of the conflict. According to the latest United Nations report on children and armed conflict, the truce contributed to a 40% decrease in grave violations against children, such as killing, maiming, and recruitment to armed formations. That is a meaningful achievement, but more progress is needed. Just last week, a mortar attack injured 5 children in Hayes district south of Hodeidah. I join UNHA in condemning the incident and calling on all parties to uphold their obligations under international law and prevent and end violations against children.
Mr. Hans also expressed his great concern from the recent military confrontations in some front lines, calling on the warring parties to de-escalate, as such escalation can bring Yemen back to the circle of violence.
However, Madam President, the situation on the ground remains fragile and challenging. On the military situation, although fighting has decreased markedly since the start of the truce, the front lines are not silent. Armed clashes have taken place in Dale, Taiz, Hodeidah, Marib, and Shabwa. I'm also concerned by reports of troop movements, including near Marib, and recent parade of fighters in Ib. These continued sparks of violence, alongside public threats to return to large-scale fighting, increase fears and tensions.
An 86-year-old Yemeni man was shot in the U.S. state of New York over the weekend. He was shot while he was on his daily walk with a 25-year-old suspect who went on shooting spree while riding a scooter. Thomas Abreu was identified as the shooter on Sunday, but the motive behind the 6 shootings remains unknown. Massam announced it cleared hundreds of mines, explosive devices, and unexploded ordnance in many Yemeni areas. In its statement, Massam Operations Room stated that last week, the field teams were able to remove 572 Houthi mines and explosive devices. According to the statement last week, Massam teams were able to clear more than 58,000 square meters of land in Yemen. 2 demining workers were reported to be killed in Houthi-led explosion in Sada. This report has more details.
2 Yemeni demining workers died in the northern province of Sada while attempting to disarm stacked landmines planted by the Iran-backed Houthis. Yemeni Landmine Records, a casualties monitoring group, claimed the employees were working as part of a team in the government-controlled Al-Buqa region when 2 anti-tank mines set on top of each other exploded as the workers attempted to dismantle them. According to the organization, the Houthis deliberately intended to murder deminers by grouping landmines in one spot, putting devices that could not be discovered by traditional means, and laying explosives equipped with motion detectors. Yemeni authorities and the Saudi-funded Massam demining program believe that the Houthis have planted over 1 million landmines and improvised explosive devices throughout the nation over the last decade, making Yemen the world's most mined territory since World War II. According to the monitoring organization, landmine blasts have killed at least 8 people, including children, in Taiz and Hodeidah this month. Massam urged parents to educate their children and warn them against touching suspicious objects in order to save their children's lives, and criticized the international community and UN agencies for failing to do more to address the current crisis with the Houthis. Since 2018, 33 Massamdi miners have been killed and 52 have been wounded in landmine explosions, despite the fact that hostilities in Yemen have greatly lessened. Since a UN-brokered ceasefire went into force in April last year, the Houthis have continued to place increasingly sophisticated landmines, even in areas cleared by the Saudi project. There are other sites that Massam's crews previously cleared, but which have since been remined in bigger numbers and with more dangerous techniques. According to the Massam Project's executive director, the methods and techniques employed by the Houthis in their development of mines and explosive devices are constantly evolving, and the Houthis are always striving to upgrade their mines and explosive devices and equip them with new technology. 18 of Ta'iz's province's 23 districts contain Houthi landmines, making Ta'iz the most extensively mined province in Yemen after Hodeidah in the west.
Rights Radar for Human Rights called for protecting civilians in Hodeidah. Rights Radar called on the UN mission to monitor the Hodeidah Agreement for an effective role that provides real protection for civilians in Hodeidah, especially in mine areas. The organization expressed its regret on the death of a woman and the injury of a child who was with her as a result of a mine explosion. The Houthi militia intensified arrest campaigns against citizens under baseless reasons and fabricated charges. Human rights sources confirmed that the militia kidnapped about 65 civilians in the capital Sana'a from various activities in June. The sources stated that the elements of the so-called Houthi security and intelligence intensified their campaigns of prosecution and kidnapping. A recent rights group reported documented the Houthi violations against civilians in Hajjah. This report has more details.
Human rights reports documented dozens of violations committed by the Houthi terrorist militia in Hajjah Governorate during the month of June, including storming citizens' homes, arresting a number of civilians, and recruiting children into its military ranks. Several people, especially women and children, were affected by the infractions observed throughout June. The contents of several houses were looted and tampered with, and some properties were confiscated. 27 residences were besieged by militia members during June, with 8 houses having their contents plundered, 14 houses having their contents tampered with, and 5 properties confiscated by the militia. According to the reports, 24 civilians were detained, 5 of whom were transferred to militia prisons in the besieged capital of Sana'a. Of these 24 people, 4 were women and 3 were elderly. The remainder were young and middle-aged people between the ages of 25 and 40. The group enlisted a sizable number of children to join its radical summer camps. Over 900 minors between the ages of 12 and 18 were recruited, as this age group is the most vulnerable to Houthi sectarian rhetoric. In addition, Yemeni health officials and international aid organizations attributed the epidemic of measles in Hajjah to anti-vaccine campaigns by the Houthis. During the past 3 years, Houthi media and officials have adopted a narrative that demonizes vaccines, describing them as a weapon used by the US to kill Yemenis and urging Yemeni parents to refrain from vaccinating their children. The Yemeni governorates under the control of the terrorist Houthi militia are witnessing a widespread continuation of violence against civilians of all segments, without regard for vulnerable elderly, women, and children.
Judicial sources said that the Houthi militia forced about 200 judges to enroll in a closed sectarian course organized in Sana'a. The sources pointed out that the militia called 200 judges to attend a meeting at the Legal Institute in Sana'a, and upon their arrival, the militia leaders confiscated their mobile phones and arrested them in a closed sectarian session. The sources stated that the session is still continuing until now, and the 200 judges are prohibited from communicating with their families. Since the Houthi coup in 2014, higher education institutions have been hijacked by the Houthi militia. Hundreds of university professors were abducted and subjected to torture. Salaries of academic staff are suspended. This has doubled their suffering. This report has more details.
Not so long ago, universities in Yemen looked like this. doctors, engineers, poets, writers, professors, and those who wore the banner of building future generations graduated from here. But the situation is different today. University education is one of the victims of the absurd Houthi war, where ideas are infused with sectarianism in the areas under the militia's control. The cost of education has been raised without taking into account the deteriorating conditions of Yemenis, and university professors have been deprived of their salaries, and universities have taken platforms for their systematic ideas. Difficult living conditions and the interruption of salaries make families unable to continue university education for their sons and daughters. Indicators of the coordination rate in universities under the control of the Houthi militia, including Sana'a University, which is the first university in Yemen, show a frightening decline in the number of applicants for study. Despite the reduction of GPA rates to lower levels, the turnout rate didn't witness a noticeable improvement in all colleges. The economic conditions and the Houthi war prevented many young people from pursuing the university education and forced them to look for simple jobs to help support their families. The sources added that the students who were unable to pay went to their exams as they were certain that preventing them from taking exams was an impossible step to take towards graduates who have been exhausted by years of study. But when they went to the exam halls, they were stunned by the administration's implementation of its threats and preventing them from taking their exams with their peers, which caused chaos to protest against this uncertainty. Despite their colleagues' attempts to pressure their administration to stop its decision and its insistence that prompted the test students to suspend their exams and refrain from taking them until further notice in solidarity with their colleagues.
Coming next in the news. Houthis impose new measures to blackmail passengers in Sana'a airport. Welcome back. Ib is witnessing a state of unrest due to Houthi militia crackdown on citizens. Such Houthi measures targeted activists who participated months ago in the funeral of an activist who was killed by the rebels in jail over criticizing the Houthis. This report has more details.
The head of the Houthi militia's governing council withdrawn his pledges to release the detained young men from the Yemeni city of Ib after their participation in the funeral of the activist Hamdi al-Mukhal, who was killed in a security prison, despite the fact that 4 months have passed since their arrest and some of them were transferred to detention centers in Sana'a. This came at a time when the security case sponsored by the Houthi militia in Ib Governorate has expanded to El Adin district west of the Governorate, where armed confrontations have been taking place for several days between two families, with the support and sponsorship of local officials of the militia. It also sponsors an armed gang led by a former prisoner, which is now targeting visitors to the district, which has one of the most prominent tourist attractions in the Governorate. According to local sources in the city of Ib, the promises made by the head of the coup ruling council when he visited the governorate last month went unheard. However, after the end of Eid al-Adha period, two of the detained young men who were transferred to Sana'a were released to join the traffic police who had previously been released. The sources stated that the militia intelligence presidency has so far rejected all mediations and guarantees offered for the release of the rest of the detainees. Led by the young man named Ali El-Sayaghi, who was known for his charitable activities in the old neighborhood of Ib, which has become a center for opposing the militia's plans for sectarian change and glorifying those belonging to it. One of the sources described the head of the militia's ruling council as having no authority, indicating that he pledged days before Eid to release El-Sayaghi, but what happened after that was that the intelligence service refused to do so. Children, women, and large groups of residents were forced to flee their homes after the intensifications of confrontations in Ib, increasing the number of displaced more and more.
The Yemeni riyal suffered a huge loss against foreign currencies in the city of Aden. Banking sources confirmed that the Yemeni riyal suffered a huge loss against foreign currencies after the purchase price of $1 jumped to 1,425 riyals. This comes as part of a series of losses gained on the riyal amid a state of inaction from the part of the government. Passengers at Sana'a airport complained from the provoking measures imposed by the Houthi militia on them. According to local sources, those Houthi measures aim to blackmail passengers by imposing unlawful taxes on them. This report has more details.
If you decide to travel through Sana'a airport, which is under the control of the Houthi militia, you will have to spend more than half a day there in order to complete your travel procedures. Not because the airport is crowded with travelers, but because it has turned into a Houthi station for hunting and humiliating politicians and activists of both sexes who are viewed with suspicion. Passengers who left Yemen during the last 2 months through the airport stated that the hardship of travel begins with obtaining a seat from the offices of Yemeniya Airlines in the areas controlled by the militia, where the group restricted the reservation procedures through a special room run by a cell of its internal intelligence service that was established by the militia. According to the sources, the cell controls the number of seats and the identity of people who obtain reservations from Sana'a to the Jordanian capital or on return flights from there for those coming from other countries. Travelers mentioned that the price of a travel ticket from Sana'a is much more than the price in government-controlled areas, as it is sold at $500 in government-controlled areas and at $800 in militia-controlled areas. They took advantage of people's need to travel and their inability to afford land travel to areas under the government control, which takes 12 hours by car, while passenger buses travel in at least 18 hours. According to their narration and the assertion of many residents in Sana'a, when a person goes to the airline office to buy a ticket, the staff informs you that all seats are reserved. But when you leave the office and at the gate, brokers come to offer you any number of seats in exchange for a bribe of $100 for each seat. The Houthi militia took advantage of the conditions of travelers abroad, whether for treatment, study, or return to their work, and their inability to board the land road to Aden, which takes 12 hours in addition to renting transport vehicles, which amount to $600 for the round trip, and opened the door for selling seats on the black market.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. United Nations Security Council discussed latest developments on Yemen today. Houthi-laid mine explodes and kills 2 demining workers in Sada. Rights report documents Houthi human rights violations in Hajj. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.